Hello everyone. This is a continuation lecture to the last ulcerative and vesiculobulous disorders. These are your learning outcomes. And just to remember, in the last class, we saw a few acute lesions and chronic lesions. So let me just remind you of the classification on which basis we are going about this class. So we are basically classifying this ulcerative vesiculobulous disease based on the clinical course of the disease into acute lesions, chronic lesions, and recurrent lesions. In acute, we have primary herpetic gingivostomatitis, herpes zoster, erythema multiforme, Stevens-Johnson syndrome. In chronic, we have pemphigus, pemphigoid, bullous pemphigoid, mucous membrane pemphigoid, paraneoplastic pemphigus, epidermolysis bullosa. And in recurrent lesions, we have recurrent herpes labialis, recurrent intraoral herpes, and erythema multiforme. And apart from this, we also classify them based on hereditary, based on their etiology. Hereditary as epidermolysis bullosa, dyskeratosis congenita, familial benign chronic pemphigus, Darier's disease. And in infections, we have primary herpetic gingivostomatitis, recurrent herpes labialis, herpes zoster, chickenpox, serpangina, hand-foot-mouth disease, Ramsay-Hunt syndrome, and we have immune-mediated or autoimmune disorders such as erythema multiforme, pemphigus, pemphigoid, bullous lichen planus, epidermolysis bullosa, and other miscellaneous such as oral submucous fibrosis, allergic stomatitis, burns, traumatic blisters, id reaction, and radiation mucositis. All of this classification is was given at the end of the uh, last class presentation, and it is given in this presentation as well. I want you to go through it and remember the classification, at least withhold or memorize two classifications in your memory, whichever you are comfortable with. Preferably, I would like you to learn all the classifications because learning them in order of classification helps you in terms of remembering the etiology of the condition. Then based on histopath, we can categorize them as intraepithelial, subepithelial, and both involving both intra and subepithelial layers. Intraepithelial, we have pemphigus, Darier's disease, and subepithelial, we have mucous membrane pemphigoid, epidermolysis bullosa, traumatic blisters, and condition involving both, we have erythema multiforme. And just based on oral ulcers, we can classify them based on mechanism. Local disturbance, traumatic ulcers, necrotizing xylem metaplasia, and based on the mode of onset, we have primary, which is aphthous, traumatic and malignant ulcer, and secondary, which initially presents as a vesicle bullae or nodulus, herpes zoster, pemphigus, and herpetic gingivostomatitis. And based on the duration, we have acute, again for the ulcers, we have acute ulcers, which is primary herpetic gingivostomatitis, varicella zoster, herpes zoster, herpangina, erythema multiforme, allergic stomatitis, and acute necrotizing ulcerative gingivitis. And recurrent ulcers, we have recurrent aphthous stomatitis, Behçet's disease, cyclic neutropenia, allergic stomatitis, erythema multiforme, ulcers due to nutritional deficiencies. And in chronic ulcers, we have traumatic ulcers, tuberculous ulcers, syphilitic ulcers, deep fungal ulcers, like histoplasmosis, and ulcers in HIV, ulcers in ulcerative lichen planus, pemphigus, pemphigoid, and malignant ulcers. So this is and based on morphology, we have discrete, grouped, and based on number, we have solitary and multiple. Based on number is another important classification. Solitary is generally traumatic, malignant, and we have some other conditions which presents as solitary ulcers in some cases of tuberculosis. and in some cases of neutropenic ulcers. And in multiple we have herpetic gingival stomatitis, aphthous stomatitis, herpes zoster, and so on. So remembering them based on their classification is again very important. So let's continue and do the other um, diseases, other vesiclovulus ulcerative diseases. To start off with, we have aphthous stomatitis. So the etiology for aphthous stomatitis is generally unknown. It probably represents a focal immunodysfunction, and sometimes there is a viral or bacterial agent identified, and sometimes most times there is not. That is, there is no influence of any infection over these ulcers, and the triggers for these ulcers varies from case to case. So the etiology for the cause of these ulcers vary from case to case, starting from increased. It can be as diverse as something being stress and anxiety, hormonal changes, dietary factors, trauma, and sometimes even viral influence. So these alterations in barrier permeability may be a factor, and it can occur as in some cases of HIV and AIDS, and bone marrow suppression, Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, or in case of iron or folate deficiency, iron, folate, B12, zinc deficiency, and some cases even magnesium deficiencies are shown to be causative factors. How it is because when the patients are treated accordingly with nutritional supplements, micronutrients, magnesium, zinc, some patients have shown significant, who have otherwise not been able to recover, have shown significant improvement, thus leading to the hypothesis that it could be dietary deficiency. And although it is immunology can play a key role, the specific mechanism of how immune complexes come into play in aphthous stomatitis is still not very clear. The human leukocyte antigen, HLA subtype, can be a factor in some cases, and this aphthous stomatitis is it almost affects almost over 25% of the population, and prevalence is approximately 20%. So there is a good chance that in your clinical practice that you might come across an aphthous stomatitis case at any given point. The presentation for aphthous stomatitis, so it is generally a recurrent self-limiting painful ulcer, and it is usually restricted to the non-keratinized oral and pharyngeal mucosa, and it is well demarcated ulcers, well defined ulcers, with a yellowish base and an erythematous halo. So this plays a key clue in most of the ulcers, which causes inflammation around them. So you might remember from your basic sciences knowledge the signs of inflammation: Ruger, pallor, dolor, and all that. So you can significantly see all these signs in most of the cases of these herpetic ulcers, traumatic ulcers, or aphthous ulcers. You can see erythema surrounding the ulcer. There is pain associated, um, and sometimes in certain severe cases of ulcer, it might be associated with rise in temperature. So you can see all the positive signs of inflammation in aphthous ulcer, and this is a very classic feature, that is, it's a very defined ulcer with an yellow fibrinous base and an erythematous halo. And there are three clinical forms. One is minor ulcer, then major ulcer, then herpetiform lesions. So the minor variant is the most common subtype, and it is occasional. It occurs mostly single, but often multiple also. It is less than 1 centimeter in diameter. So the differentiation between minor and major comes here. So the occurrence in number and the size of the ulcer is what basically differentiates the minor and major. Although we can conduct, or we can try and establish it with histopathology, but then the size of the ulcer is what majorly determines the subtype here. For minor being less than 1 centimeter, oval and round shape, which heals by itself 7 to 14 days, and with intervention maybe a little earlier. And the major variance, which is otherwise called Sutton's ulcer, is more than 1 centimeter or greater in diameter, and it generally occurs single ulcers, or sometimes you can only see 2 or 3 ulcers in the entire oral cavity, whereas in minor it can occur either single, or it can mostly occurs like 4 or 5 in different areas of the mouth. Major, it is more than 1 centimeter, and it usually occurs as single, but you can also see in rare cases you can see multiple also. And comparatively the ulcer is much more deeper than that of the minor form, and the edges are not as defined as the minor aphthous ulcer. The edges are little ragged, and again it has elevated and erythematous margins, and it may persist for several weeks and even to months when it comes to major aphthous, and often it heals with some amount of scarring. And moving on to the herpetiform variant, which is the least common variant, because there is always a good chance that the herpetiform of aphthous ulcer might always get confused with herpes, primary herpetic viral infection, because the presentation of both of these ulcers are almost similar to the core, except that in herpes there is an viral influence, whereas here it is herpetiform, it is not herpes. It appears like an herpetic ulcer, but it is not herpes. So they are generally a grouped superficial ulcers, which are grouped and which are just 1 to 2 millimeter in diameter, and they usually present as crops. Crops means they present as groups, so you cannot easily find a single solitary herpetiform ulcer. They will usually present as multiple, so many in groups. Sometimes these might coalesce to give an appearance as a large ulcer also, and the number can vary anywhere from 10 to 100, and it usually it occurs in both keratinized and non-keratinized tissue. And healing again for this herpetiform type of aphthous ulcer also occurs within 7 to 14 days. There is no etiologic role for herpes simplex virus, like I mentioned before in this. And when it comes to recurrent aphthous ulcers, it occurs as simple and complex and aphthosis. The complex aphthosis is usually severe, almost continuous ulcerations, disabling large and severe lesions, whereas the minor or the simple form is usually smaller in size, and there are few lesions and usually minor or herpetiform. So in AIDS patients, the lesions are typically more severe and occur at any oral surfaces. So uh, when uh, when you have an HIV positive AIDS patient, please note HIV positive is different, and AIDS is different. So there, you might all very well remember that they are all based on various parameters like the CD4, CD8 count, and patients presenting symptoms. So in an AIDS patient, it can occur in any surfaces. So all these rules of keratinized and non-keratinized mucosa are off in case of AIDS patients. So the diagnosis for this is usually done with clinical appearance, and the treatment and everything is purely based essentially on clinical examination and patient history. And sometimes um, there is also a positive family history, and in cases it is required, in case of a differential diagnosis of something like a pemphigus pemphigoid or some underlying diseases suspected, then you can go for an excisional or incisional biopsy of the lesion. Differential diagnosis can be depending on the number. It can be traumatic ulcer, it can be herpes simplex, viral infection, or it can be pemphigus pemphigoid, or it can be cyclic neutropenia, etc. Treatment for recurrent aphthous stomatitis. First, we have to look into the symptomatic treatment, that is with pain relief with the topical anesthetics and analgesics. And um, so in most of the cases, in minor and major herpetiform ulcer type, symptomatic therapy alone should be more than adequate. But if we suspect a systemic cause, like for example, if you suspect an deficiency, or if you suspect stress or anxiety being the triggering factor, or any psychological condition being the enabling factor, then that should be addressed as well. Tetracycline based oral rinses have proven to be very helpful in treatment, and corticosteroid therapy such as betamethasone, clobetasone, which are applied directly over the lesion, can reduce the amount of inflammation, thus giving patient some amount of relief. Then intralesional corticosteroid injections can also be given. Then in short duration systemic corticosteroids are also prescribed in severe cases, and other immune modulating drugs can also be helpful, such as and amyloxanox paste, hydrochloroquine, tacrolimus, and dapsone have also been used in treatment of aphthous ulcer. And one more drug that is used is pentoxifylline. If you remember, this is a drug which is also prescribed in case of oral submucous fibrosis. It's called pentoxifylline therapy. Thalidomide treatment has shown efficiency, and in some cases you might have to skip um, local application, and you might have to go on to systemic corticosteroids and systemic drugs, immune modulating drugs for treatment in case of very severe case. Generally, the prognosis for aphthous is very good, and there is good chance of recurrence, but provided if we take care of the condition, there should not be any. Moving on to Behcet syndrome. Etiology for Behcet syndrome is it's a multisystemic disease. It is secondary to immune dysfunction, and it's associated with the HLA subtypes. And the subtypes involved are HLA BW51 and HLA B12. And the HLA BW51 is the one cluster in those which are most commonly seen in the Middle Eastern and Northern Asian population, whereas the other one is mostly seen in the European and American people. The clinical presentation for Behcet's disease is generally the classic signs noted are in oral cavity, eye, and genitalia. Painful, sometimes debilitating oral and genital aphthous ulcers. Uh, Ocular lesions can be painful conjunctivitis, uveitis, um, iritis, retinitis, and hypopyron. So at this point, I hope you all remember the anatomy of the eye from your first year. So we have the outermost transparent covering, and we have the conjunctiva that is attached to the cornea, which is the area where we look for symptoms for jaundice and others, which is the conjunctiva. So there is inflammation of the conjunctiva. Then there is iris, which is the centric portion of the eye, where you have the opening where the vision is passes through. You have iritis, you have retinitis, which is the receiving area, which consists of cones and rods, which helps you translate the image that you see to your brain. Retina, there might be inflammation of retina, retinitis. So apart from this, there might also be cutaneous signs, such as erythema nodosum like lesions. You can have acneiform eruptions, and you might have pustular eruptions also associated with it in Behçet's disease. You will have a positive Pathergy sign, which is very characteristic of Behçet's disease. And the idea is when a sterile pustule at a site of sterile intradermal saline injections, 48 hours, you inject subdermally, like intradermally, a small quantity of saline, you will start seeing a very sterile pustule in that area. Other symptoms usually are secondary to vasculitis, and central nervous system can get involved, which can cause headache, you know, paralysis, and sometimes encephalitis type of problem, and gastrointestinal problems like diarrhea, inflammatory bowel disease, and the patient might, in advanced cases, might have vascular thrombosis, hematologic and other organ system manifestations. So, like I said, the diagnosis is done with pathology test be conducted, and also other clinical and history signs can lead to diagnosis of Behçet's disease. Differential diagnosis is usually erythema multiforme and Reiter's syndrome, Crohn's disease, mucous membrane pemphigoid, and treatment is generally with systemic corticosteroids, because Behçet's disease sometimes mostly is identified at its most severe form, and by the time it might be a little late for us to treat it with topical corticosteroids. So we generally go with systemic corticosteroids, and sometimes with immunosuppressive drugs such as interferon and tumor necrosis factor alpha inhibitors, azathioprine, cyclosporin, chlorambucil, methotrexate, and thalidomide, dapsone, and colchicine are other drugs that are used in treatment of Behçet's disease. Prognosis is fair, generally, because the disease is very chronic, and what we can at the best do is manage the disease to the best possible. Going on to chronic multiple lesions, we have pemphigus. So we have already discussed a little about pemphigus, if I'm not mistaken, but we'll go a little much in depth again on pemphigus. Starting on with the etiology, it's an autoimmune disease where antibodies are directed towards the desmosome related protein, desmoglein 3 or desmoglein 1. It's a drug induced form that exists with uh, very less specificity in terms of immunologic features, clinical presentation, and histopathology. So generally, the clinical presentation of pemphigus is it occurs in over 50% of cases. In pemphigus develop oral lesions. The variants, we all know the subtypes: the vulgaris, vegetans, foliaceus, erythematosus, paraneoplastic pemphigus, and drug-related pemphigus. And in most of the 50% cases, we see oral lesions, and oral lesions develop in 70% of cases in terms of pemphigus vulgaris. It's a painful, shallow, irregular ulcer with um, friable adjacent mucosa, and because these disease tend to rupture and form an ulcer, most common in non-keratinous sites, and such as the buccal mucosa, floor, and ventral part of the tongue, and often are the basic or the initial sites which are affected by the disease, and and, uh, and sometimes force in on the uninvolved mucosa and skin can lead to new lesions, which we call the Nikolsky sign. So apparently, when pressure is applied to a normal area, that results in formation of a new lesion, which is called the Nikolsky sign. It's very classic of pemphigus vulgaris. And scopically, what we tend to find is that there is separation or clifting of the subbasal form of basal layer epithelium, and vesicle forms at the site of epithelial split. And if you do a direct immunofluorescence examination, it is positive in all cases. And in IgG localization of intracellular space of epithelium, there is IgA localization in intracellular space in 30% of the cases. Indirect immunofluorescence examination is positive in 80% of cases. So what is to be understood is that immunofluorescence test exam, direct or indirect, plays a very key role in terms of diagnosis of pemphigus related lesions, where you see in direct it is positive in almost all cases in terms of pemphigus vulgaris, and indirect is positive in almost 80% of the cases. Diagnosis is generally carried out with on the basis of patient history, clinical examination, clinical appearance, the manifestations in the mucosa, direct and indirect immunofluorescence. Differential diagnosis can be mucous membrane pemphigoid, erythema multiforme, erosive lichen planus, and paraneoplastic pemphigus, and sometimes even drug reaction. So the treatment for pemphigus, or you start with systemic immunosuppressive drugs, corticosteroids, prednisone, azathioprine, cyclophosphamide, or drugs used in treatment of pemphigus vulgaris. And plasmapheresis with immunosuppression is combination therapy that is usually prescribed for pemphigus. And prognosis is generally fair. Approximately there is a 5% mortality rate secondary to long-term systemic corticosteroid complications. So this is generally fair, but patients have tend to show a very good recovery with in terms of pemphigus vulgaris. Moving on to bullous pemphigoid, it's again an autoimmune disease. It is due to the binding of autoantibodies to the specific antigens in the lamina lucida of the basement membrane, and it is very self-limiting, lasts for only a few months to 5 years, and it's rarely life-threatening. And it often occurs in conjunction with multiple sclerosis, malignancy, and drug therapy, especially in diabetics. Clinical features: it occurs mostly in over 60 adults in over 60 years of age. And the skin lesions, usually there is a blister on an inflamed base. They do not continue to extend and cause denudation. Oral manifestation occurs in 30 to 50% of cases, which is manifested with small and less painful, non-extensive labial involvement as pemphigus vulgaris. Desquamative gingivitis is another sign of bullous pemphigoid. It is difficult to distinguish from mucous pemphigoid. Again, the diagnosis is based on the clinical presentation and on immunofluorescence, direct immunofluorescence. Moving on to mucous membrane pemphigoid. So it's a chronic autoimmune disease of which the trigger is unknown. The autoantibodies here are directed against the basement membrane zone, and the clinical presentation for mucous membrane pemphigoid is usually there is presence of vesicle and bullae, which are followed by ulceration. It affects multiple intraoral sites, and it usually seen in older adults, and it has a slight female predilection, and the case ratio is generally female to male is 2:1, and ocular lesions are noted in 1/3 of the cases, and proclivity for scarring in ocular, laryngeal, and nasopharyngeal and oropharyngeal tissues are also noticed. Micro will find that there is subepithelial cleft formation, and indirect immunofluorescence examination is positive in 80% of the cases, and indirect immunofluorescence examination is usually negative So in terms of mucous membrane pemphigoid, it is important to note that direct immunofluorescence is the most effective way to laboratory test for mucous membrane or microscopically test for MMP. Diagnosis is usually with biopsy and direct immunofluorescence examination. Differential diagnosis is generally pemphigus vulgaris, erythema multiforme, erosive lichen planus, lupus erythematosus, and treatment is generally done with topical corticosteroids, systemic prednisolone, cyclophosphamide, tetracycline, and niacinamide, dapsone are all used in treatment of mucous membrane pemphigoid. Prognosis is generally fair, and management become because management often becomes difficult due to variable response to corticosteroid by the patient, and also it also requires multiple specialists working on the patient, ophthalmology, ENT, derma, dental, oral medicine specialists. So since it requires so much work and so much and the patient's variability in terms of response to corticosteroid as a treatment of choice, sometimes it tends to become very difficult. So the prognosis is generally fair, but initial key cases and the ones which are generally restricted to the oral cavity generally show a fairly good prognosis, basically. Okay, moving on to single ulcers. Start off with, let us start with a malignant ulcer such as the squamous cell carcinoma, which is it is the majority of malignant ulcer that is seen, which is approximately 80% in 80% of malignant ulcer cases, and it is related to tobacco and alcohol consumption or usage. In some cases, it can also be associated with virus such as the HPV, human papilloma virus, and it generally occurs as a stepwise progression of genetic alterations, from variating itself from dysplasia to carcinoma. The clinical presentation is usually it is white or red surface alteration. In later stages, it might become with a deep ulceration, indurated ulcer with elevated margins, and the most common sites are the lateral border of the tongue and the floor of the mouth. Please notice that the lateral border of the tongue and the floor of the mouth are generally declared as the most high risk areas for any disease formed in that area to be led into a malignant form. They are marked as high risk areas, and lower lip or the vermilion surface are also a common location. In advanced stage disease, it is associated with the limitation of movement. There is trismus, and there is also lymph node metastasis, that is the submandibular and the cervical lymph node metastasis. Radiographically, you might find erode or the adjacent bone has been eroded or invaded in very later stages. Generally, when it involves the lateral border of the tongue or the lip, you generally do not find any radiographic appearance at all. So in these cases, it doesn't help much. Conclusive will be biopsy, of course, and in terms of understanding the lesion, when it is associated with the bony hard surface in later stages, you might find some erosions or uh, you know invasions, which we might have to treat later on. And microscopically, it is either well differentiated or moderately differentiated. There is invasive islands of cords of epithelial cells, and differential diagnosis is generally chronic traumatic ulcer, syphilitic ulcer, deep fungal infection, and necrotizing xylometaplasia. And treatment is generally surgical excision is the treatment of choice when it is limited to a soft tissue area, and sometimes it can be combined with radiation therapy, and chemotherapy is also advised. So the current trend is combination therapy, where we do not go for a standalone either surgery or just radiation or just chemo. We go for a combination therapy where we tend to combine depending on the patient's clinical presentations. It can be a combination of either surgery with radiation or radiation with chemo or surgery with chemo. So that depends on the presentation of the lesion. And prognosis generally, stage 1 and stage 2 has a generally good prognosis. Stage 3 and stage 4 is generally has a very fair to poor prognosis. Uh, Moving on to fungal ulcers due to fungal infection. Let's start with the few of them that are identified: histoplasmosis, blastomycosis, mucormycosis, and aspergillus. And start off with histoplasmosis. The etiology is fungal infection caused by Histoplasma capsulatum, and the fungus is endemic to mostly the United States, and to be more specific, Ohio and Mississippi River Valley areas. Transmission is due to spore inhalation, and oral lesions usually occur secondary to pulmonary lesions with uh, hematogenous dissemination. And the clinical presentations are generally general symptoms for histoplasmosis is very mild. Oral lesion associated or generally follows pulmonary lesions. Chronic ulcerations with necrosis, elevated nodular margins, and sometimes it might even resemble a squamous cell carcinoma. On the tongue, a cobblestone ulcer may be noted, and the oral ulcers tend to persist until we address the systemic disease, that is the deep lying fungal infection within the pulmonary region. And diagnosis is generally with the demonstration of organism in biopsy specimen, culture, and serologic demonstration of the antigen or antibodies for histoplasmosis. And differential diagnosis is generally tuberculosis, squamous cell carcinoma, tertiary syphilis. Treatment is in very mild cases. Generally, we tend to develop immunity and tends to heal by itself. But in severe cases, you might require some strong antifungal drugs such as amphotericin B, and other drugs such as ketoconazole, fluconazole, and itraconazole are also used in treatment of histoplasmosis. Prognosis, patient might require spontaneously. It's generally good unless it is associated with some other form of immune suppression condition in the patient. If the patient is immune compromised, then there's a chance that it might become quite severe. Moving on to blastomycosis, the etiology of blastomycosis is again due to para uh, Paracoccydilis bruxellinians. I'm sorry if I'm getting the name wrong. It is quite a lengthy organism, and it is the organism which causes blastomycosis, and transmission is usually by spore inhalation. And again, the infection, the foci of infection lies in the lungs, the pulmonary area, and all the other areas like skin, mucosa, bone, viscera are all secondary to pulmonary infection. Clinical presentation, in acute stages, a patient might present with pneumonitis, fever, weight loss, night sweats, and productive cough. In chronic cases, there is granulomatous lesions like in oropharyngeal mucosa, skin, and pulmonary signs mimicking tuberculosis. And then skin and oral mucosal lesions are characterized by verrucous growth, ulceration, and sometimes scarring can also be seen in healed areas. Mucosal lesions sometimes might mimic squamous cell carcinoma ulcer, and and diagnosis is generally done with cytologic and histopathologic examination. Culture of sputum can be done, and differential diagnosis for blastomycosis is generally malignant tumor, tuberculosis, and tertiary syphilis. Treatment is systemic antifungals, oral itraconazole, And prognosis is again depends on the patient's systemic condition. The prognosis might vary. If there is an associated disease, then it might become quite complex and a little challenging to treat. If left untreated, blastomycosis there is a chance that blastomycosis have also proven to be fatal. Moving on to mucormycosis, the etiology is organism of zygomycetin class, that is Rhizopus, Mucorgenera, Absidia organisms tend to cause mucormycosis. It is noted mainly in immunosuppressed individuals and in case of uncontrolled diabetes, which also indirectly contributes to immunosuppression and or delayed healing. Clinical presentation is generally large, irregular, and necrotizing ulcers, and it most commonly involves the palate with concomitant paranasal sinus involvement, enough to perforate through the oral mucosa and to reach the uh, nasal apparatus. And radiographic findings, you will generally find maxillary sinus opacification and irregular sinus wall destruction. Um, Microscopically, you will find tissue necrosis with fungal invasion into the blood vessels, and there is non-septate branching and a broad hyphae of the fungus involved. And diagnosis is generally done with radiographic and microscopic findings in terms of mucormycosis. Please remember, radiographic findings do not apply in histoplasmosis or blastomycosis. In mucormycosis, you use radiographic findings because when it involves uh, the maxillary sinus, there are certain things to look out for. Differential diagnosis is maxillary sinus neoplasia, maxillary sinus aspergillosis, soft tissue infarction, and other deep fungal infections such as histoplasmosis and blastomycosis. And treatment is generally surgical debridement and intravenous antifungal agents such as amphotericin, ketoconazole, and control of the underlying disease process. Prognosis is generally good depending upon the underlying systemic factors for mucormycosis. Moving on to traumatic ulcer. Traumatic ulcer etiology. There we have given a here we have listed out a general cause for traumatic ulcer. It generally occurs as a single ulcer, identifiable, and patient might in most cases remember the trauma associated. So it can be mechanical, thermal, or chemical in origin. And generally you can comprise this as accidental due to functional or factious injury. The clinical presentation is generally a tender to very painful ulcer with a low fibrinous center and well-defined margins. And the margins can present with inflammatory or erythematous signs. And microscopically, you might find a fibrinous surface with a mixed inflammatory infiltrate and granulation tissue at the base of the lesion. Diagnosis is generally done patient, like I told, with history. Patient might mostly remember history of trauma, especially when it comes to electric burns or pizza burns or aspirin burn, or let us say, for example, oral piercing or ill-fitting processes. Patient will specifically come and tell you that this denture is hurting me. It is like when I put it, it is poking into my skin. It is causing some disturbance. So there are certain conditions where patient will specifically come and tell you this is the reason for my for the painful sore in my mouth. But in some cases, patient might not actually realize what has actually caused the ulcer. Some of the easiest thing is a denture cleaner, or biting after local anesthesia, and sometimes in case of mouthwash with high alcohol contents, phenols, you know, in these and self-injurious habits. So these are conditions where patient might not be able to correlate or will not remember much about what is causing the disease per se. So history plays a very important role in terms of diagnosing and evaluation of all the associated you know um, let us say, for example, if there is a process involved, evaluation of the process. If there is an orthodontic involved, appliance, in evaluation of the orthodontic appliance. So evaluation of the condition, that is basically, that falls under the category of examination. So history, examination, and look out for any non-specific histologic findings in terms of traumatic ulcer. The diagnosis for traumatic ulcer is usually aphthous ulcer, neutropenic ulcer, and squamous cell carcinoma, and primary syphilis, which is oral chancre. So treatment is generally with symptomatic treatment. We give patient topical analgesics, and we also try to advise them to maintain an antiseptic kind of environment with antiseptic mouthwashes, chlorhexidine mouthwashes. The healing generally occurs within 10 days. This depends on the degree of trauma involved. It might vary again, and generally it occurs within 10 days. Prognosis is generally very good with traumatic ulcer. So this brings the conclusion of this particular presentation. I know these oral presentations can sometimes tend to become a little monotonous, and it can be a little tough to follow also. I've already told this in our classes before. I generally do not directly read from the slides. I generally try to cover things that are generally not there on the slides. So take your time, since it's a recorded session, take your time to listen, and please note down the other points that have actually not been written on the slide, but has been orally delivered. When it comes to the topics within today's presentation, please go through pemphigus vulgaris and mucous membrane pemphigoid without fail. So let us have kind of an Easter egg. I do not know how many of you like sit and listen to the entire presentation of the class here. So let's just have an hidden Easter egg kind of an assignment here. So it is a little late to Easter, but then like let's have an Easter egg here. So what I want you to do is, I want you to write an assignment on or type an assignment on pemphigus vulgaris and mucous membrane pemphigoid. So people who have followed through the lecture, try to please combine the things that are given on the slides, the textbook, and what has been orally told you during the lectures, and compile them together, and just write down all the points related to pemphigus vulgaris and mucous membrane pemphigoid, and a column will be created for you in Google Classroom, and you can do the submission there. Thank you, and take care.